Hello and welcome to Tokyo Inklings. My name is CY. You can find me on my website at tokyostationpens.com, on Instagram at tokyostationpens, and on Twitter at tokyostationmnh.
And my name is Jacob, and I'm Foodafan on Instagram and on Twitter, and I have a blog at foodafan.com.
All right, so thank you very, very much, Jacob, and as well as all of the listeners for tuning back in. I think I want to start reading reviews because after we read our last review, we suddenly got an influx of written reviews on iTunes, which is very encouraging, and so I'm really happy to hear that. And really, please, if you enjoy the podcast, please consider writing a review for us, telling a friend, telling, I don't know, your coworker, your family member, whoever that you think might enjoy our content. Anybody who likes Japanese stationery or Asian stationery in general, I think could really benefit from listening to our show. And that is one way that you can help us continue to make this podcast. Now, I think before every episode, I would like to read a review because we really have some great reviews coming in. And I know, Jacob, you are a bit apprehensive because you kind of get nervous about getting bad reviews. But fortunately, we have mostly 5-star reviews. There's one 1-star review, which maybe I'll read later. But I want to get through our 5-star reviews because it's really, our listeners really say such nice things about us.
Okay.
So, let me read this review by 82 Greg. 82 Greg says, "Great show. Tokyo Inklings provides a great insight to the Japanese pen users / collectors community, which is hard to learn about due to language barrier. CY and Jacob provide interesting viewpoints into the developments in Japan that can reach out to the US pen user / collector community. I learned a lot!" Exclamation mark. Thanks a lot, 82 Greg.
Nice.
We really, really appreciate your review. And yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do, really to, we said at the beginning of this show, I think all the way back in episode 1, we said there's really not a lot of English language information that you can find on the Japanese pen world. And, exactly what he wrote in this review, providing insight to the Japanese users collectors community, which might be hard to learn due to the language barrier. That's exactly what we're trying to achieve. So thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you.
Now, if you have a review that you would like for us to read, maybe you have some thoughts about the show, you like a certain aspect, please don't hesitate to write it down so that other people can also learn why you like this podcast and why you recommend it. So thank you very much. Now, we've kind of started to get into this format of the show where we start with our acquisitions because somehow every 2 weeks we manage to buy new stuff, which is kind of crazy. So we'll start with the acquisitions and then we'll go on to the news. But we have some interesting acquisitions, from both of us actually.
Yeah.
In very different ways. So Jacob, do you mind actually letting me start with my acquisitions? Because I think yours will segue better into our news segment.
Sure, go ahead.
So, my first one is not really an acquisition, but it's more of a modification. I think we've droned on and on about how much we love the Moonman T1, for me particularly in brass. But actually, I really, really enjoy another pen, and that pen is the Mont Blanc Martelet.
Ah, yes.
And I think that's just such a cool and unique pen for the hammered finish that they have. And I've learned that actually I can make my own hammered finish using my handheld Dremel.
Of course.
I've also learned that it's a pain in the butt. But I've successfully over the last week created a Moonman T1 Martelet where I've recreated a hammered finish on my Moonman T1. And what I've done is I've actually rounded out the facet, so it's a round pen now. And I've done everything, including the cap, the section, the piston knob, and even the inside of the piston connector. So I think that looks pretty cool. And I think this pen will probably go to our friend Quay. I promised her that I would make her a raw brass pen, and she seemed to really enjoy this one that I had done. So I'll probably put this aside for her, and I'll probably not make another one. At least not the full martelet, because it just takes such a long time. And I was actually talking to Ian Schoen from Schoen Pen Designs, because he had done something similar.
I remember seeing that.
And yeah, he had one on his Pocket 6. And I asked him, do you have any feedback or advice? And he says, it looks great. My hands hurt just looking at it. No feedback. Advice is steer clear.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's exactly what I told my girlfriend. She said, "Oh, are you gonna sell these?" I'm like, "No, I'll probably never make another one of these because it just hurts so much to make."
You know that now you're gonna get 10 orders for them, right? So you're gonna have to make more of them.
Maybe not. But the thing is, I ordered a bunch of the brass Moonmen, and I do intend to experiment with finishes on each of them. So hopefully I'll have a variety of finishes that I'll be able to show, with the martelet just being one of them. And the martelet, I think, will, if I do make them, they will become really, really expensive because the cost doesn't justify my time. If I think the pendant like this should sell maybe $200, but if I break it down in terms of labor by hour, it's like a third of what I should be making. So it just doesn't make sense.
It reminds me of a certain other person in the Japanese pen community who's been experimenting with the brass pens for a long time.
Wonder who that may be. I guess we'll get to him in a bit.
Yes.
But yeah, maybe he'll see this pen and he'll start experimenting on his own.
Yeah, because he was inspired by you the first time, right?
Yes. So yeah, we'll see.
Yes.
And then the second pen that I got in is this Shumi no Bungabako and Nakaya collaboration exclusive. And this is actually a set, one of two, different models. So they have a model where they have a fountain pen nib. It actually says Gokfutos, so it's the C nib. It's not actually a C nib, but it's just made in the image of a C nib. And they have that as a roll stop, which is really, really cute.
Yeah.
And that one is gold trimmed. And I think that one is akataminuri. And then the other one in that set is the one that I got in, which is you have a fountain pen, an actual pen as the roll stop. And it kind of looks like a clip, but it's not. And it's absolutely hilarious because it's super whimsical. It's fun, and it's fun. And it has a wonderful SM nib, which I remember we talked about last week, me not being so much of a fan of the SM nib. I have to say, this SM nib, it writes very well, but I still think it's a bit boring in terms of character. But I think what will interest a lot of people about this nib is that it is ruthenium plated. So the actual pen is kuro tamenuri, which is black tamenuri, and that's black on red. And they have a silver inlay on the section as well. So I showed you this pen last week, Jacob. I personally think it's beautiful. It's not really going to be living in my collection because it doesn't. It's not a self filler,
right?
But I think that the pen itself is just absolutely fantastic, and the urushi work is really quite top notch.
I really love that roll stopper, but yeah, some of these, very fancy urushi pens, they can look a little bit sort of pretentious, like sort of boardroom pens. But the fact that you have this whimsical roll stopper makes it. I mean, it takes all of that away because it becomes like a humor, right? I love it for that reason.
Yeah, it's like an inside joke. I think this is something that fountain pen memes would like.
Yes, he would love it.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be selling this pen because, as I said, it's not a self-filler, so it doesn't really belong in my collection, but it was just so cute. I really wanted to get it in to check it out.
Right.
And honestly, this pen, it doesn't disappoint if you're a fan of the soft medium nibs, which is a fantastic nib. Actually, this soft medium nib writes better than probably all of the other ones that I've tried so far. Yeah. So Jacob, you have some pens, and one of the pens you actually got a few weeks in, but we didn't talk about it. That's the Waverly nib, right?
Yes, I've been buying a few pens from Mercari, as I usually do. And one of them was a Pilot 742 with a Waverly nib. So I've tried the Waverly nibs in at Itoya and Maruze, and I always liked it, but didn't spend much time with it. And I'm too cheap to buy pens at MSRP in general. So I never had my own Waverly nib, but then I found one on Mercari for a good price. I ended up buying it, and I just love this nib. I might even go so far as to say that this might be my favorite nib so far.
You know, Jacob, your handle is Fude fan.
Yes.
And you don't have Fudes in your pen collection.
I think like Concords and Waverleys are sort of distant cousins to Fude nibs. They sort of belong in the same.
But you think then the Waverly is actually perfect for your use? It's like a mini Fude, isn't it? I mean, describe the Waverly for us.
Yeah, in a way, it's not that different from Pen BBS, what they call them the mini Fude nib, and it's in a way it's a little bit similar to some vintage Mont Blanc nibs. It's a little bit more of a bend here, but it's still not all the way Fude.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not you get line variation depends on how you're holding the pen. I found some articles online saying that the whole point of a Waverly is that it's a monoline nib. You're never gonna get line variation. But when I'm writing with, I get almost like a slightly brush-like strokes. But it's very smooth while still having a bit of character, and I love that. So I think it's probably at least the most interesting Pilot nib. So I'm happy that I got this pen. But another thing about this pen is that when you buy pens secondhand in Japan in particular, the price tends to be better if the pen has some kind of engraving. So sometimes people engrave their names or there's a company name, and that was the case here. So the listing on Mercari, it said there is a company name on the cap. I cannot show you the company name, but just know that there is a company name on the cap. Okay, fine. I mean, I might do urushi on it anyway, so I don't care. But okay, I'm curious about why you can't show it to me, but go ahead. Right. So I bought it, and I got it, and there's a company name So Dick on it.
What does a company called Sodic do?
So apparently this is a company based in Yokohama. They do some industrial automation. They make some fancy machines, and they might have one of the most unfortunate names I've seen. But
yeah, I have to say that engraving is hilarious.
Yeah, I'm almost tempted to keep it as is and not do urushi just for that reason. But we'll see. There might still be urushi in the future.
I want to actually get into a bit the Waverly nib. This is a podcast about Japanese pens, but fountain pens are not indigenous to Japan, and I think the history of fountain pens is actually very, very interesting. Notably, for example, you have nibs in Japan that nobody else continues to make, such as the music nib, but somehow these survive in Japan. And I think in a way Japanese pen makers are, not just pen makers actually, in Japanese industry in general, are very good at taking ideas and really perfecting them. And the Waverly nib actually I think has an interesting history. So if we look deep into the history of fountain pens, David Nishimura, who runs Vintage Pens, he actually has an article about the Waverly nib. He wrote this in 2013, so it's not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. But he claims that the creation of the Waverly nib is credited to Duncan Cameron, who in 1850 joined his brothers as one of the principals of the Scottish firm of McNiven and Cameron. And this company actually has made nibs with the word Waverly engraved on the nib. So, McNiven and Cameron and Waverly nibs, these are things that you can find if you're lucky on eBay. And in the patent, actually, I'm looking at the patent, and it does have this upturned nib. It says they are formed with the extreme tips slightly turned up. So the Waverly nib was apparently very, very successful, and according to David, was in production for about 100 years. And yeah, so the company McNiven Cameron, they renamed the company to Waverly Cameron in 1970, and they were dissolved in 2012. So apparently Richard Binder had started customizing nibs with upturned tips, which he called the Waverly. And David claims that pen sellers wrongly assumed that the Waverly could be used as a generic term for any nib with an upturned tip. And apparently, Waverly nibs were not necessarily invented by McNiven and Cameron. They actually had original nibs that were upturned that were not called Waverly, that were even created by McNiven and Cameron. Now, my point here is that you saw a lot of imports into Japan in the fountain pen technology area. So we've discussed a bit how Onoto had massive influence on Japanese fountain pens. Actually, Onoto is the vacuum filler that actually inspired, I believe, the Japanese eyedropper system. And you have I can't imagine any other possibility outside of the fact that there must have been Waverly nibs that were imported into Japan, and predominantly Pilot started to make these Waverly nibs as well, with the upturned tip. So I think this is a really good example of Japanese manufacturing kind of continuing the spirit of those, let's say, the nibs from, what many people consider to be the golden age of fountain pens. And it's interesting to me that they continue to sell it, but they've really perfected that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's interesting that it's still only available on some models, but we know that this small shop in southern Tokyo, Asahi Kami,
Yep.
They sell the 823
yep.
with, I think, 2 nib options, right? The Fey nib and the Waverly.
Correct. And when I talked to Yaz, the shop owner, who is really, really nice, by the way, I really want to go back to his store. He told me that the Waverly was designed to write extremely smoothly. That is the purpose of the Waverly, at least from a Pilot point of view.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So that's the Waverly, but you've got some other nibs, because I passed you a nib on Wednesday.
Yeah, so I got this Pilot Custom 743 a few months back with this very broad coarse nib. And suddenly I got interested in these fat Japanese nibs, and I wanted to see how Pilot's coarse nib compares to other Japanese fat nibs. So this week or last week I got not one but 2 platinum coarse nibs. It just happened, and then I borrowed this Sailor Zoom nib from you because I wanted to test all 3 of them side by side to see how similar they are and what the differences are. And I played around with them a little bit yesterday, and what I would say is that the Zoom nib, at least the way I'm holding it, gives me the broadest line, the fattest line. The Pilot coarse nib is second, and I will say Platinum is a fairly distant third place, which I found a little bit interesting. Again, it might be because of the way I'm holding the Zoom nib, I'm not sure. But then in terms of feedback, I had almost no feedback at all with a zoom nib. So I had almost no character at all when I'm writing with it, which I thought was a little bit boring, a bit bland in that sense. While Pilot's coarse nib actually has quite a bit of a sweet spot. So if you hold it the right way, it's very smooth, but just tilt it a little bit and it becomes quite scratchy, and the ink flow becomes uneven, which I thought was a bit interesting. But then Platinum is actually my favorite when it comes to feedback, because even though it's a coarse nib, even though it's very broad, it still has a little bit of that subtle and very consistent pencil feedback that I like so much. So I think based on that, the Platinum 3776 coarse nib is probably my favorite of the three. But I know that you're not. You've been a bit negative on a Platinum recently, so I guess this is not your favorite.
My problem with Platinum nibs is that more often than not, you see this tine gap in the tines. And I think even the one that you have, actually, I don't think the tipping is even, is it?
Right, you're right. It's a little bit uneven. Actually, on both of them, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that the quality of the nibs aren't exactly the best. But here, actually, I want to point out that, while we're discussing these coarse nibs, actually the coarse nibs are not just on modern pens. They are on a lot of, apparently, Pilot vintage pens used to have coarse nibs as well. And this, to me, is quite interesting, that you often hear, Japanese nibs are finer because they have to write kanji, so it's made to write in smaller blocks, blah, 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 blah. I don't necessarily think that that's true. I think it's actually a bit of a fashion thing, isn't it? That there were moments in time and moments in history where Japanese really liked using big, fat nibs.
Yeah.
I mean, the coarse nib, I think it's bigger than a Western, even maybe a Western double broad, no?
Yeah, I would say so. I also think it's interesting how different the tipping is on the three pens. Platinum nib is, the roundest of the three. It still has a bit of facets, but I think it looks like the roundest of the three. While Sailor's zoom nib looks like an unfinished Naginata Togi.
Yeah, it's faceted.
While Pilot's coarse nib looks like an unfinished stub nib to me.
Yeah, I would say that you're probably just correct. And for me, what you said is very interesting, because I think Pilot actually has the most similarity to Western nibs, I would say, in terms of the smoothness.
Yeah.
In terms of even the nibs that they offer, right? They offer like stub nibs. They offer the Falcon nib, which is obviously soft and flexible. They offer actual soft nibs. And, when you say the course is kind of like a stubbish character, that kind of copies the old German-style nibs, right?
Exactly, yeah, that's true.
And they even have a BB nib.
Yeah, that's the interesting. So Platinum goes from B to coarse directly, right? While Pilot goes from B to BB to coarse.
Yes, and the BB is very rare. I don't think they make that anymore.
Oh, really? Maybe.
I'm not sure. But I've not seen it around very often.
That may be the case, yeah.
Yeah, but you're exactly right. And then Sailor goes directly from B to Zoom. I guess there's a music in the middle, but I would say Sailor's music is not really, I mean, by my definitions, I wouldn't call it a true music nib.
Right.
Even though, yes, you can write vertically with it. I would say that that's probably more akin to like a unfinished stub nib, so similar to the Pilot BB.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Yeah. But yeah, so you enjoy those pens.
I enjoy those pens, and I enjoy the Platinum in particular. One thing that was a bit curious was that I took these platinum nibs and I stuck them on a Moonman T1, of course, as one would do. One of them didn't really fit in a sense that it sort of fell behind the feed, like into the section almost, while the other one fit just perfectly. And they're both modern coarse nibs, this flat shape. So I don't know what the difference is. Maybe I have to bring both to you and you can have a look at them and see what the difference is.
Did you check the feed?
No, I didn't. No.
Yeah. It might be different eras, but you'd really need to take a look at the feed for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're liking your Oyaji pen's black gold trim.
Absolutely. That's my style.
Ugh, so boring.
And actually, on that note, I've also been enjoying an Oyaji ink, so Pelican Blue Black. So let me sort of rewind a bit and explain why. So, as you know, I've been studying for some exams, so some professional qualifications, and that's been, for me, a good excuse to use my pens and notebooks. But as I'm taking more and more notes, I become more and more paranoid about, erasing all the notes with some spilled coffee or water. So for the last few weeks, I've been using mostly pigmented inks or iron gall inks. And so pigmented inks tend to be a bit high maintenance, a bit difficult to use. So I've been mostly
difficult to clean.
Yes, that's for sure. And iron gall inks can be very aggressive depending on which one you want. So I was looking for a sort of weak and very usable iron gall ink. And so I got this Pelican Blue Black. So I know that in some countries, Pelican Blue Black is not iron gall. And even in Japan, there's been some conflicting report about whether or not it's still iron gall. But as you know, we have this geek and iron gall expert in Japan. We have this guy, Gary. And Gary makes his own iron gall inks, and it also helped Platinum make this classic line of iron gall inks. And Gary buys a bottle of Pelican Blue Black every few months, and he conducts his test and checks whether or not they are still iron gall. So I looked at his website and his latest report, and he confirmed that lot B19, which I guess is last year's Pelican Blue Black, still iron gall. So based on that, I went to Morrison and I looked for B19 and I found that. So that's how I know I have an iron gall version of Pelican Blue Black, and I love it.
This story is so fantastic because it just goes to show the kind of there's no bound to the geekiness of pen users. I mean, he goes and buys a bottle of Blue Black every few months to check if it's iron gall.
Yeah.
Somebody hired this guy, really, because I can't believe he spent so much money to just check, just to make sure that they're still iron gall.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's
to be fair, the Pelican inks, especially the 401 series of inks, they're quite cheap. So, but I appreciate what he's doing.
I mean, I'm worried about his storage space.
I understand too.
Yeah, but yeah, we have quite, I think, an interesting news segment for you, because we have some news, four main topics.
Yeah.
But one of the more important ones is the Sailor and the Plus collaboration.
Yeah.
Now, I've personally gotten a lot of inquiries, including from Brad Dowdy of the Pen Addict, as well as from Diana from the nib section, asking me, has Sailor actually been bought out by Plus? Did they convert these convertible bonds?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not an expert on finance, but I know somebody who is. Has Sailor been bought out by Plus?
Right, so let me first preface this by saying that I'm not an expert on CBs, so I could still be wrong here, but let's go back to the beginning and explain what has and hasn't happened. First of all, to recap what we said a few episodes back, we say that Sailor has issued something called convertible bonds. And we say that a company called Plus has bought these convertible bonds. So I want to explain a bit more about what that actually means. So let's start with the absolute basics. So what is a bond? So a bond is basically like an IOU. So let's say you are a company and you want to build a new factory. And you don't have the cash at hand to do that. So you need to raise capital. And there are a few different ways you can do that. One way is to issue bonds. And let's explain by example what that means. So let's say you issue a 1 million 5-year bond. That means that whoever is buying that bond is effectively lending you 1 million yen for a duration of 5 years. And in return, that buyer usually gets interest. In the world of bonds, that's called coupon payments, but it's just interest. And then after 5 years, they're gonna get their 1 million yen back. That's the basics. And these kind of simple, straight bonds are issued by both corporations and by local and national government. So it's very simple and very common. Now, what Sailor issued was not a straight bond, but a convertible bond. And a convertible bond is a little bit more complicated because a convertible bond has something called a share option attached to it. And that gives the bondholder, the buyer, at least two options. They can still hold on to the bond until expiry, just like a normal bond, and they're gonna get their interest payments and they're gonna get their money back. Another option is that they can convert the bond into a number of shares in the issuing company. And in this case, the issuing company is Sailor. Now, here's the most important point. The number of shares that you get, and thus the implied price per share, is set in advance. That's part of the bond's terms. And it doesn't matter what the current market price for that stock is. And that in turn means that, let's say the price per share is 100. It's called a conversion price. If the conversion price is 100 and the stock is trading at 150, then it's a good idea to convert because you're going to be effectively buying these shares at a discount. So if you sell the shares that you bought at a discount, you're going to get more money back than you would get if you just hold the bond until expiry and just get your money back. So that's the basic idea. And then on the other hand, if the conversion price is higher than the current market price, then there's no point in converting because you will be paying a premium for each stock. It makes more sense in that case to hold on to the bond until expiry and get your interest, get your money back, and use that money to buy the stocks at the current market price, which is lower than, right? So that's the basic idea. There's a little bit more in reality. There are some complicating factors. You're losing out on interest payments. There are some transaction costs, but that's the basic idea of a convertible bond and when it makes sense. So based on that, let's look at the specifics of the Plus Sailor deal. This is a 7-year convertible bond. And that means that Plus has 7 years to decide whether they want to convert. And actually, yeah.
So when is this bond, when was it issued? Was it issued this year or 7 years ago?
It was issued in July this year and it expires in July 2027.
Okay.
So Plus has 7 years to decide. And actually, if you look at the terms right now, in theory, it would make sense for them to convert right now because the conversion price is 133 yen and Sailor closed at, I think, 165 on Friday. So right now, at least on paper, it's a very good deal. But to answer your question, I do not think that Plus has converted the bond to shares yet. And let me explain why that is. In Japan, there is financial regulation that requires large shareholders to publicly disclose their shareholdings. And they're also required to disclose trades related to that shareholding, to those shares. So in this case, Plus is required to disclose any trades related to Sailor. And these so-called disclosure reports are actually publicly available. There's a database on a website called Edinet. You can go there and you search for Plus and you find all the information. And you can see that Plus has not converted. And you can see also why. Mm-hmm. And this is where it gets interesting. So I, of course, went there and I looked for these disclosure reports and I found even more information there. Mm. So in the report that I found, it said that Plus and Sailor have agreed in principle that, and this is a very Japanese idea, in principle, right. Plus will convert the CBs into shares if, and this is important, if certain conditions are met. And those conditions are actually listed in this disclosure report. And perhaps the most interesting condition is that Sailor's both business divisions, so both the stationery division and the robotics divisions, they both need to have been profitable in the black the preceding financial year. So that's one of the reasons why I don't think Plus has converted yet. So another reason is that the disclosure report states the transaction date to be the date when we know the CB was issued. And normally for a CB, there is something called a conversion period, which is the time when you are allowed to do this conversion. And usually in Japan for CBs, that starts a few months after issuance. There's one more thing that is quite interesting about this disclosure report. It also says that Plus has agreed, if they convert, they promise to hold on to the stocks for a long time. It doesn't say how long, it just says, choki. Yes.
I love it.
They agree to hold on to the stock for a long time, which basically means that even if Plus could potentially, flip and sell the stocks, they are not going to do that. So they are going to be long-term shareholders, majority shareholders in Sailor. But yeah, they have not converted yet. And they require Sailor's both divisions to be profitable the preceding financial year.
So, I've read on M&A Online, right, which I've shared with you as well, that actually they have reported, 買い増し57.78% に引き分ける報告書を17日に提出した。So what does that mean?
Right, so what they are referring to is actually this disclosure report. So what this website does is that they go to this database which I talked about called Edinet, and they look for any disclosure reports related to large shareholdings, and they write a post about that. So in this case, they found this disclosure report for Plus and Sailor. And the thing is, this report is actually quite confusing. I think they misunderstood, because if you look at this report, it says that Plus currently owns 14%. And if you sum up the current ownership, and if you sum up the potential shares, so what they would get if they convert, then it becomes more than 50%. So I think they misunderstood the disclosure report.
Okay. You mean 40%? They own like 43% right now.
No, they own 14, I think.
14?
Yes.
But, okay, so the convertible bonds would give them 40%. So they bought 40% worth of convertible bonds.
Yeah, I think if they convert, they're going to get just over 50%. So it's a little bit less than that, but yes.
So if they convert, will be 57, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So my next question is then, what does that mean for the management of Sailor?
Well, they clearly have an incentive now, if they didn't have it before, to make sure that their business divisions are profitable. Because if Plus chooses not to convert, if they hold on to this bond for 7 years and demand bond redemption, then Sailor probably doesn't have enough cash on hand to pay back, so then they need to issue new bonds, and they might be issue new bonds and get worse condition, and it's almost like a payday loan for them.
So Sailor wants to sell.
It's probably much easier for them to let Plus convert, because that just means they have to issue new stock. It's easier for them to convert than to pay back the bond.
Okay. And what do you think this would mean for Sailor's management team? Do you think Plus would, replace the management? Because we saw, and we'll go into the next part about it, but we did see, big changes in Sailor, including their product lineup that we discussed previously. Now their corporate identity, they've also changed. So I'm just wondering, what does that mean? If they sell, what kind of implications are we looking at for their management?
That's hard for me to say. I think the only thing you can say right now is that Sailor has a strong incentive to make sure these conditions are met, because it's easier for them. Now, we have seen, again, we can go into details about what has happened later, but we have seen recent changes at Sailor. Now, we don't know, because you can't really tell from the publicly available information. You don't know how much Plus influenced those changes, but there's a chance that Plus played a central role in that, but we don't know.
Right, yeah. That's really interesting. And of course, that's a great segue to our next topic, which is the rebranding of Sailor. Now, Sailor has gone through several iterations of branding in the past. And I was listening to The Pen Addict earlier this week. And something I didn't notice is that they actually don't use the same font on their box and on their pens.
I've never noticed that.
Yeah, so on the trim of the pens, it says Sailor founded 1911 in this kind of serif font.
Right.
Kind of like an old black letter font. And on the box, it's a sans serif, block. It's like a impact or something. I don't know what font it is, but so I am not convinced that the new typeface will make it onto the actual pens. The logo, however, probably, I think, should go on the pens.
At least, I guess the engraving, the anchor engraving, probably is going to change, right?
Yeah, I think if it doesn't change, that would be very, very strange. To use a logo that's no longer your corporate identity. So I guess that will be a huge undertaking in terms of tooling. Now, to link that back to what you had said just now, Sailor, obviously, you mentioned, is doing quite well. Their stock prices rose a few percentage points from July to now. I think it's quite impressive. And then they are now going to suddenly invest all of this into machinery to change their font, or to change the anchor engraving. Do you think that's something that would make sense for them in light of the condition that they should be in the black for both divisions?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, but we know that they have said that one of the reasons why they have issued the bonds is that they want to invest more in their machinery and the factory in Korea, right? So clearly there is investment going on there, and at one point, I'm sure they have inventory of nibs, but at one point they're going to have to make new nibs, and if they're going to upgrade the machinery anyway, maybe this is something that they can do fairly easily. Yeah,
totally agree. And hopefully that doesn't cost so much, especially if they keep the general shape. So I'd imagine it would be similar to the time that they had their old engravings, which you find quite a lot of, and then move to the new engraving. I think it's particularly interesting from a market perspective. their new font is, I think it targets two segments of the market. Now, the first segment of the market, which I think is much more obvious to our Western audience, is the kind of wavy, non-angular shapes that they're applying now. And I think this is particularly interesting because what I've read online and other internet sources is that a lot of people find that they don't understand. They think that it looks better. The old one looks better. They don't understand what's the point of the new one. However, I think when I look at it from a Japanese market perspective, I actually think that it makes a lot of sense, because if you look at the logos of or the typography of the different, let's say, stationery shops, those are actually especially the more female oriented shops, those actually enjoy this kind of wavy, kind of non-angular logo and typeface. And I might be totally wrong, but I feel like this is trying to almost speak directly to a more feminine audience that they haven't been focusing on in the past.
That's possible, but I wonder then if the current product lineup is suitable for that, or if you're going to be seeing further changes to the product lineup with maybe some more interesting colors. We have the four seasons, but other than that, it's still a lot of black and gold with some burgundy here and there.
Yeah, but then when you talk about Sailor, when I talk about Sailor, I don't think of the black and gold ones, right? We think of the sparkly body ones.
Yeah, but those don't have Sailor branding anyway, right? They have.
They do.
Do they?
Sailor is imprinted on the cap band, and it is imprinted on the box.
But at least not on the nib, right? There's some pretty Shishikura clouds and so on.
Yeah. So it wouldn't be on the nib, or most of the time. So if you do like Pentanoto, some of them have it. Nagasawa, some of them have it, and then on others they do custom engraving. So of course those are possibilities.
I think you said that the new Bangbox pen, the Streets for Men, have that on the cap band.
Yes, the Streets for Men did have Mangara.
Yes.
On the cap band, indeed. But I think the overall point that I'm trying to get at here is when you consider Sailor as a brand, when you think of their logo, and you have more of these wavy, non-angular lines that you see in so many other stationery companies, I think it could be, let's say it's a nod. It's not a direct speaking to, but it's a nod to the idea that there are more customers than just people who buy black pens.
Right.
And I think it's interesting also that the new logo, the Sailor logo, is not in like the black color, right? It's kind of in a navy blue color that they've always had, but on the logo where they on the page where they revealed it, it's this kind of pale bluish color, this sky blue color on the horizon. So I think there's a nod to the idea that their customer base is probably not just salarymen.
And actually related to that, I think we talked about that before, but some of those previously like US exclusive pens, so like Earth and Ocean, have made their way back to Japan. I wonder if that is a sign of things to come, that we're going to see less black and burgundy and more colorful.
Yeah, that's super interesting when you bring it up. So yeah, I totally agree. It's probably a nod to that, and it sets them apart from the competition, right? The the second aspect, though, is the old kind of well, not old, but older salaryman type of people. There, I think you see their kanji logo is very important because their kanji logo, as Daryl had pointed out, is actually very reminiscent of vintage kanban, like the storefront kind of typography. So I find that very, very interesting that, they at the same time try to invoke nostalgia in the older fountain pen, let's say, collectors. And, I think that's quite smart to do that at the same time.
Yeah, that's trying to go for both markets. Yeah, maybe that works.
Do you see that though? When you think about Sailor and when you see their new logo?
I like it. Yeah, it it somehow looks both retro and modern at the same time. I like it.
I think this is a harken back to the good old days. Let's say. So, yeah, I think this this typography typography really tries to target two different segments. Whether it's successful or not, I guess we'll see in the sales. But yeah, I think this is actually quite exciting. They're trying to reinvent themselves.
By the way, while we are on the topic of Sailor, I don't think we talked about the fact that they have increased prices, because now that is publicly available. If you go to Maruzen, they have a list of all the new prices. Did we talk about that?
I think they did it along with the discontinuation. I'm not sure if we talked about it in particular, but yeah.
But some of those pens are actually really quite expensive now. I think the Rialo is like 35,000 plus tax.
Yeah.
So they're not cheap pens now. They're not cheap.
I think they had a 5,000 yen increase on, I think, across the line actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the new Sailor identity, which I think is honestly quite cool.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay. Next on our kind of news/market front, Bungajoshi. We've talked about Bungajoshi quite a few times on this show. Bungajoshi is a huge stationery event, usually in December, early November, early December. So late November, early December, and it's one of the biggest. It's fantastically and hilariously huge. It's like 35,000 people last year, right?
Yeah.
So they've actually put out now a crowdfunding plea because, and it's kind of confusing reading their crowdfunding page, but it seems like they don't have enough cash to keep running after this year.
Yeah, I read it too, and I am equally confused. So there are a few things I do understand. I do understand that they had to cancel at least one event this year. I think it was an event planned in Sendai, and they had to cancel that. Well, they turned it into an online event, but they had to cancel the actual event, and there were costs associated with that. Maybe they still had to pay for the venue and so on. I understand that there was at least a one-time cost there. I also understand there are higher costs than before, and you're making less money because there are fewer tables and there are fewer attendees. So I understand that has changed things for them. But what is not clear to me is whether they need to cover this like one-time cost because they had to cancel events this year, or if they are sort of trying to run the big Bungajoshi Haku event as before, even though that means losing money on that event.
So I think from what we know about Japanese event organizers in general, they don't really like to change the way they were running things, I would say. So from what I understood, they want to keep running Bungo Joshaku as it was, and they want to keep doing it again next year as well. And for this year, they were able to hold it somehow, but by holding it, it means that they will have run out of cash completely and will probably be bankrupt next year.
Right. But is that just a cash flow problem, or is that they would be losing money on this event?
Well, I mean, this is not clear, and probably they would be losing money. So maybe it indicates it's not profitable this year, and they would be in big trouble next year. So they need to raise some money, right? That's, I think, the point. But I think it's interesting that they're then doing crowdfunding, to try to raise funds for their company, basically, by selling these crowd-funded tickets to this year's Bungo Joshi. Now, I'm looking at this green funding site, and I see that they have 21 days left, and they're 74% through to their goal. So they've raised about 2.2 million Japanese yen, which is quite impressive, to be honest. And they're selling like T-shirts and things like this. A lot of this seems to be, 37 people backed this $130 ticket pack. What do you think about the strategy in general?
So one thing I'm wondering is how much of this has to do with them not being able to cancel and change venues. So for example, I'm thinking about like last year we had a Tokyo International Pen Show, and the day after, actually when Tokyo Pen Show was still going on, Wagner's small autumn pen show was happening, right? And Morrison wrote in his blog that the reason for that was that he had to book this venue, which was KFC Hall, at more than 1 year in advance, and it was not easy to change that. So looking back at Bungo Joshi, I mean the first thought would be, why don't you change the venue, change the format? But it may be that they are sort of locked in and unable to change the venue for a while, and that might be why they either have to go ahead as planned or cancel the whole thing.
I think there are obviously a bunch of different business implications that we don't have to go through today, but the future of stationery events probably has to be reimagined. When reading this, Bungo Joshi, as we've said many times, is absolutely massive. I think they haven't really, they didn't save up for a rainy day. And, obviously all these cancellations will make an impact on their bottom line, but I think they might start to be more careful with how they invest their money, and probably even opt for smaller venues, or even integrate more of the online. So what I hope is that they would integrate more of the online events, or even host events online in parallel to the physical events, so that people who aren't able to go to Tokyo to the actual venue would still be able to buy tickets and attend, maybe at a cheaper ticket price, and still be able to buy stuff from the vendors, so that the event overall can generate more revenue.
Another thing I'm wondering, I think we talked about that online, but we know, because we talked about it recently, we know that Bungo Joshi also runs the Inkunuma Ink Show, right? And we don't know if that event is profitable or not, but assuming it is, we know it's very, very popular. Assuming it is, I definitely think there will be room for more than one Inkunuma per year, especially given how often Tone and Limbs is or planning to do various events, right? So I wonder if that is something they could potentially experiment with.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so as always, we have to have a Mori bashing segment. So here we go.
Yes, so earlier this year, and we actually talked about that in an earlier podcast. So first of all, he does these collaborations with Fine Writing International in Taiwan. And earlier this year, he released this year's edition, which is a very long pen, because apparently he's very much into like desk pen or pens that are as long as desk pens, and he thought that would be a big hit. So he probably announced that, and that would be the special pen for this Wagner's Spring pen show. But then apparently, as far as I can tell, didn't sell that well, because the same pen was also the Wagner's autumn event pen. And now the autumn event has already happened, but that's still a pen that he's actively trying to sell. And he seems to be trying to sell it with various nib options now, most recently with this Amabie nib and the turtle nib. So I have a feeling that it's not doing that well, and we also know from a recent blog post that he was sort of complaining that his overseas customers are mostly interested in Japanese pens. So that implies, the platinum editions that he's doing, and not so interested in, the Taiwanese and other foreign brands.
Right. Yeah, I think it's just absolutely genius that it was the spring pen, but because it didn't sell now, it's the autumn pen. I think the main problem is that it's not very exciting as a pen. And the way that he's trying to sell it demands a lot of add-ons and accessories. And we talked about this last time as well. Maybe people just have had enough of Mori's kind of overly commercial approach to his blog nowadays, where it's not that interesting for the collectors who want really special stuff. And I think he's a bit out of touch of the market. I mean, obviously his overseas customers want to buy Japanese pens. I mean, seems like a no-brainer to me, but apparently was a surprise to him.
And I also think that, the main problem with this pen, it has nothing to do with the pen making. And we know that Fine Writing International makes fantastic pens. We have talked about them in several episodes. We're both big fans of Fine Writing International, especially their faceted brass pens that are just fantastic. We love them. I think the problem here is the concept, this idea that the sort of a dark, long desk pen-like pen would be a smash hit.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't fit in my pen case. So.
Yeah, there's that, and it just doesn't look that interesting. The idea was that he would sell various, like just the middle part of the pen barrel is apparently removable. He was going to sell various options, but I haven't seen anything of that yet. And the standard one, was it gray, brown, blackish? It's hard to tell because again he's scanning his photos, but the pen doesn't look that interesting, and I think that's more of a problem with the concept, the design behind the pen, rather than the manufacturing.
Yeah, I'm sure the manufacturing is fantastic because Fine Writing International just makes fantastic pens. But we'll see. Maybe it will be the spring pen again in April, because he wouldn't have sold these pens.
I'm also wondering what the next platinum pen would look like, because he normally does a few of those. I haven't seen anything about whatever the next platinum pen would look like, and I think it was very interesting that for the blue one, the Wagner 2020 platinum pen, he only offered it with a medium nib, and the reason for that is that Platinum would not offer them any other types of nibs. And previously, as you know, Wagner has had music nibs, soft fines, and all kinds of interesting nib options, but none of that was possible this time. So it was not his choice; it was what Platinum offered them. So
maybe maybe there was a inventory issue where Platinum just had extra medium nibs, and they just want to get rid of them. It's a possibility.
That's possible, but we know, as we talked like 1 or 2 episodes ago, that Kobayashi recently announced their store exclusive Platinum, which I guess is also like relatively low volume pen, and they get all of the exciting nib options.
Yeah.
So, who knows?
Yep. We'll see. We'll see in a bit. Are you going to the autumn event? I don't think I will go.
No, I think that's already happened, right? But wasn't that in September?
Oh, that was the one.
Yeah, I think so. So I think the next one, there are some small regional events in in Saitama and elsewhere, but I think the next major Wagner event is the year-end event, which is like December 30th or 31st.
Yeah, so I'm not going to that one. So yeah, Wagner, I'll see you next February.
I guess.
Yep. Yeah, that's a shame. But, the exciting things that I learned at Wagner are probably the smaller vendors, or like the smaller enthusiasts that make pens.
Yeah.
One of them is Pen Saloon.
Yes.
Right? And he made, in collaboration with Gary, the fantastic light blue black Kiboho.
Oh, yes.
And this time he collaborated with ex-Eboya, Kanesaki, right?
Yeah, and this is actually the second pen he's done together with Kanesaki. And we talked about Kanesaki before. He is probably one of the most skilled, if not the most skilled, pen craftsman in Japan. He can create anything out of ebonite, basically, right? And he runs his repair shop. He charges an arm and a leg, but he can repair any pen, right? He also does some pens on commission, and he worked with Pen Saloon. And earlier this year, Pen Saloon and Kanesaki released this Yoru no Shirbe pen, which was ebonite and Kyoto Opal, which is sort of this sparkly material. Yeah. So it was a cap and a barrel, but no nib and no section, but it was meant to fit Sailor, Pilot, and Platinum sections. So they sold that. It's quite expensive. I think about more than 50,000 yen. I think there was some price variation there depending on options, but it's quite expensive. I think it's sold out because he's not talking about it anymore. And now there's a follow-up model, which is called Yoru no Mizukagami, which is also ebonite and Kyoto Opal. I think it's a bit smaller this time because it's meant to fit Pilot number 5 size or Sailor like standard size sections, and it looks a little bit more elaborate than the first pen. There's some almost like bamboo like patterns there. That actually looks quite good. It's even more expensive. I think it's 60,000 yen.
I definitely like this pen much more than the previous one.
Yeah.
I think Yoru no Shirube was it was too contrasted, I think. The middle section of the barrel just kind of jumps out at you with this pale bluish thing.
Yeah.
And it was a bit too much. This one is a lot more subtle. And I mean the gold hardware is really kind of I find it a bit too much for me because it's so thick, but it's, as you say, a very well done pen. I think this pen looks a lot better. It's interesting. It kind of reminds me of Eboya's own bamboo.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, and of course Kanesaki used to be he used to work at Eboya. The clip is, I think, particularly interesting. When I look at these pictures, it seems that the cap is seamless. So you have to insert the clip, and then you use a screw to screw it into the cap rather than removing a finial. So that's kind of like harkens back to the ebonite pens of old.
Yeah.
Also, I think the cap has a flat spot on it.
Yeah,
right?
I saw that. It looks interesting.
I don't really know why there's a cap, like there's a flat spot on the cap. Like it doesn't really make sense to me from a design perspective, but that's just how the pen is made, so I can't really complain about that. It does look very good, but I will say that it doesn't have that glossy polishing that you love about the Ebuyas.
That's true.
It's more of a matte black ebonite.
I wonder if that is a design choice or if it's just he doesn't have the tooling to polish.
I'm sure he can polish it, but he probably wants to make the barrel kind of stand out a bit more. So I do understand that choice.
Yeah, I must say, and I agree with you that I like the fact that it's not as contrasty, and not just because the light blue and dark looked kind of strange next to each other, but also the fact that the first version you could often see the converter, right?
Oh, okay.
Here it's harder to see, so for that reason I like the design of this one better.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting if manufacturers from the West could start using Kyoto Opal. I think that would be very cool. But they probably never heard of it, so.
I know that Hiroko experimented with that as an alternative to Raden. I can't remember how that went, but there's definitely some sparkliness in this material.
All right, so we'll have to ask her next time we see her. Before we close out the episode, Hiroko actually asked us for a favor. So we have, or she has created a spare for the Pilot Justice 95. And she's created it in the same kind of gold ingots and the Isume finish, but this time in red. Now, the pen itself is extremely striking with red urushi and gold powder. So I think the pen is stunning. She's made this extra replacement barrel and cap. So if you have a Pilot Justice 95 and you would be interested in a Bookmondo pen, I think this is a great opportunity because the cost of the design is usually around $500, and you have to wait around 5 to 6 months. She is offering it for sale for $400, and so you'll get an extra barrel and cap. Whereas if you send it to you, obviously you don't lose the barrel and cap, but you don't get to use the black one again. So this is kind of like a plug and play for anybody who has a Pilot Justice 95. And Jacob, I think you have the pictures, so we can link that to the show notes. So if anybody is interested in purchasing this pen, how should they do that?
They can contact just you or me, and we'll sort it out. And what I will add to what you said is that if you want this, if you don't already have a Pilot Justice and you want it, so you want the pen with the nib, we can find a Justice in Japan on Amazon or whatever, where prices are better than in pretty much anywhere else. So we can also sell a whole pen.
Yes. So with that being said, if we are sending it to the US, I'll have to ship it to my mother, I think either next week or the week after, so that it can arrive in the US by November. Otherwise, we can use Yamato to send it, but with no ink. So that wouldn't be a problem at all. But yeah, we'll post pictures of this pen. I personally, I think it's stunning. Obviously, I have the black version. You have a black version of this as well. How do you think the red works?
So when I heard about it, I thought it would be a little bit too sort of showy with red, but I think it really works. So I like it. Yeah,
it's absolutely beautiful. You've got to see pictures of this. This is a crazy piece of art that she's done, and as usual, she's outdone herself.
It might be sold by the time this episode comes out.
Okay, so yeah. if it's not sold yet, you better jump on that because we know how popular Bookmondo is
Yeah.
in the pen world. She started doing urushi on mostly sheaths, so like sword sheaths, and sometimes fishing equipment, stuff like that. She's told us that 99% of her work now is pens.
Yeah.
And when we first met her, I think more than a year ago now, almost 2 years ago, the turnaround was like a few weeks. Now it's like 5-6 months.
Yeah.
So we know that she's just exploding in popularity.
Yeah.
So if you want that, hop on that very soon. I have nothing else to say, Jacob.
The only thing I wanted to say is that one of our favorite podcasts, the nibs section, is back, and we're very happy about that.
Oh yes, and thank you for the shout out on the latest episode of the nibs section. Hopefully, you know what? I think the ideal would be if we release on alternating weeks, so we can have nibs section and then us every week. That would be really cool.
Oh yes, that's good.
Yeah. So the nib section, if you're listening, please release on alternate weeks from us. That's our final housekeeping item of the day.
Yes.
And with that, my name is CY. You can find me on my website at tokyostationpens.com, on my Instagram at tokyostationpens, or on Twitter at tokyostationmnh.
And my name is Jacob, and I'm Foodafan on Instagram and on Twitter, and I have a blog at foodafan.com.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.